Mr. Perry, if anything, this tragic incident is teaching everyone some humbleness to an extent, not to rush in to state what is not officially stated, confirmed, verified. And you know what? Why am I tiptoeing around it? This is part of Hamas's way of action. This is part of their modus operandi, to use manipulation, to use lies to promote their propaganda.
Yeah, of course. I was just amused that you expect humility from journalists. Look, yeah, Israel has a credibility problem, but how can you compare it to Hamas, realistically? I mean, we're talking about an organization that sent people here to rape and disembowel and, massacre. I should think, given that, it's clear to everyone that they wouldn't recoil from telling a lie. Okay?
Yeah.
So accepting the Hamas...
where they draw the line.
Hamas version over... Accepting the Hamas version requires a level of idiocy that I think most journalists fail to attain. It wasn't the finest hour. Serious journalistic outlets, not unfriendly ones, like the Wall Street Journal, started this off by assuming it was an Israeli strike before anyone said anything. They didn't even quote Hamas.
But perhaps the fact that it's happening still in the early stages of the war will change the course of covering the later phase.
The question is whether the media takes this moment to introspect. They assumed it was an Israeli strike. After the evidence was presented, and it's pretty convincing, they continued to present it as a version. They emphasized the version, which is a subtle way of saying we believe it, but it continues to be Israel says, as opposed to evidence suggests. And by the way, the New York Times, late in the day, was still calling it a strike, and a strike doesn't work with a misfired rocket. It works with an Israeli strike. So they're a little bit too equivocating, and I think they should actually learn some humility from this debacle.
Egypt facing more or less its nightmare, suggesting today that, well, making it clear that we're not going to receive not even one Palestinian refugee from the Gaza Strip, suggesting that Israel will take them in the meantime and put them in the Negev desert, not far away from the site of the massacres. Yeah.
I spent years living in Egypt, and if there's one consistent thing about this interestingly diverse country, it's that everyone who found out that I had any connection to Israel told me that they were not going to solve the Gaza problem for me. I mean,
we're telling you up front.
No, it really is incredible that they are so primed and ready to reject any suggestion that Gaza is their responsibility that I cannot begin to explain. So all I can say is I strongly, strongly urge against even musing about such a thing, unless people want to start really destabilizing what is perhaps Israel's most important strategic relationship. We can forget about Egypt taking in refugees, never mind in big numbers, never mind permanently.
Yeah, perhaps part of the solution later, but not part of the immediate solution to the problem.
You have to. Sorry, you have to remember that in Egypt there is a clear between the government that is
and the people
and Assisi cannot
rally the people. The abyss between the Egyptian administration and the people.
He cannot totally ignore the street.
There seems to be a major gap between the administration's statements, not the American one specifically, but mostly in Europe, the official statement, the official stance, and what's happening in the streets.
What's happening in the streets is a lot more complicated. Don't forget, we are seeing, and Jews abroad are experiencing, the anti-Semitism that you were just talking with Michal Kotler-Wunsch about. But Ellie, it wasn't too long ago, it was just a week ago, that Europe was lighting all its buildings in blue and white. And I take Dan Perry's point, then we were sitting just about the same hour in these exact same chairs, that the sympathy was bound to evaporate, right, as the pictures of the massacre were going to be replaced by the complexities of fighting in Gaza. And I said it was true, but I said that the impression of the massacre was never going to entirely go away, and I think that that's true.
All of that is undoubtedly true. It's an incredibly complex picture, as you get whenever you start talking about anti-Semitism, but sometimes things are simple. In every country I've seen, all the studies and all the polls show something pretty straightforward. The sympathy for Israel reduces exponentially with age.
In the United States in particular.
Yeah, Yeah. So basically, Israel's problem is with a generation of people who are not in power now, so you're looking good right now, but will be in power in 10, 20 years' time. And Israelis can tell themselves it's just anti-Semitism. It's far more complex, and it attaches in many cases quite closely to a complete lack of patience with Israel's actions in the other Palestinian territory, which is the West Bank.
Are progressives in the U.S. or far left, or not far, or the left in Europe are saying, hey, something happened on October 7th, or are they engaged in this soul digging?
It is genuinely insane that you have progressives in America and members of the LGBTQ plus community talking about how they stand with Hamas.
With Hamas.
Thinking that equals standing with Palestine, and not understanding for a split second that they would last maybe a split second if they tried to live in Gaza.
Yeah.
It's just berserk. And that's in the realm of information that can be imparted to these people, those who are intelligent.
But I agree very much with Dan that the sentiments, like in the universities, the key universities,
Ivy League,
you see such a trend in anti-Israeli that is, I believe, like you said, initially boosted by the perceived behavior of the Israeli government in the West Bank and the Palestinians. You know, the people go for the underdog. I mean, that's American students go for the underdog. So we wanted to be not to be the underdog. We wanted to be the strong ones. We pay in public opinion.
The pending normalization deal with between Israel and Saudi Arabia is named as one of the triggers to this horrendous, vicious massacre that we've seen, or just yet another component in the mix of it. And yet Saudi Arabia, that, as we've been discussing with our Bastian Wari earlier in the broadcast, is still trying to stay on the fence.
It is very sad that, you know, players in a human comedy feel the need to play out their preconceived roles, basically. So it's accepted wisdom right now that, sure, because of this insanity that happened October 7th, Israel has to do a land invasion in Gaza. And it's accepted wisdom right now that if Israel does that, even though Saudi Arabia hates Hamas, they're going to have to pretend to be very upset they can't do a deal with Israel. And you know what? I don't claim it's realistic. I really don't. But I have a dream. And in my dream, people don't play out their prescribed roles, okay? Israel can invade Gaza next month also. What if, instead of giving this gift to Hamas and Iran of 20,000 dead bodies, Israeli and Palestinian, instead of any of that, Saudi Arabia does a quickie peace deal with Israel, brings along Kuwait, the entire Arab world lines up as one behind Israel and the West to put maximal pressure on Hamas to do X, Y, and Z, and maximal money. Hold on. A kitty of $200 billion. The most dictatorial regime in the world, at the end of the day, falls victim to the desires of the street. It's inevitable. It's never not happened, okay? I want to see how Hamas stays in power when it's pretty clear that the world, including the entire Arab world, is very serious about rebuilding Gaza.
Especially when all other solutions never worked.
Well, again, I'm not saying that Hamas will hand over the keys. I'm not saying this is actually going to happen. But in my dream, which is an alternative universe with more rational players, perhaps, it might. I went so far as to actually put my reputation on the line and sketch this out in an op-ed in The Hill today. So, you know, I realize many will say I'm a naive dreamer and completely ridiculous, but think about it.
Well,
listen, I'll retweet it with my thought experiment.
Actually, I heard that Biden is flying from here directly to Riyadh. Talk about your plan.
Indeed. The Perry peace plan.
Well, let's continue for a tiny bit longer with this thought experiment, and because we've been saying here in studio, there's no need of thinking outside of the box. We need a new box altogether. Who else could have the baldness to really change the Middle East in terms of the Arab regional
Qatar
players?
would be hugely important. If somehow Qatar were convinced, by whatever carrot, to join that initiative, they hold the key, because without Qatar, Hamas falls.
And what are the possible Western six against Qatar?
I think Qatar wants to be part of the modern world and to be an accepted member of the global family of civilized nations. They just hosted a World Cup. They hosted a World Cup. They have ambitions, okay? They want to be in a different place, and they have the money for it.
Gentlemen,
You should just buy the Middle East and be done with it. I'm selling.
Gentlemen, it was a pleasure fantasizing
Doing
about
business with
perhaps, of a different type of a Middle East. Until then, we're living in the very same old Middle East with those very familiar, cruel rules. But thank you, nevertheless, Mr. Dan Perry, Owen Alterman, I24 News Senior Diplomatic Correspondent, Captain Guy Poan. Thank you very much for this.